good evening, everyone. It's really nice to have you on our December Zoom talk. Before I introduce Ori, I just want to show you a book which I'm going to recommend. If you love the desert, it's a book I've just finished called Arabian Sands, and I think it's a beautiful description of life in the Middle East in the after the Second War. So it's a little recommendation for anyone who's interested in life in the desert, written by an English explorer. So tonight our speaker is, of course, the fantastic Ori, the scientific director of Jerusalem Botanic Garden. I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. And I'm not going to speak any longer. So welcome, Ori, and thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. What a great introduction. It fits exactly my feeling because I'm really in love with the desert, and that's why I've offered to give a talk on this subject. And we always say that the smallest thistle or the smallest weed in the desert is a big rose, because it's magic when something comes out of the dry grounds in the desert. And since in my country, Israel, half of the country is desert, and our surrounding neighbors, Jordan and Egypt, are also arid, I feel honored to have the desert next door in a couple of hours, or even in 25 minutes drive from Jerusalem. You are in the Dead Sea in the desert. So I'm really near the desert. And before I will talk about the plants, I would like to make a short introduction about the desert of our corner of the world, which is the Middle East. And you can see here the map of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, on the left, with Jerusalem, where I work at the Botanical Garden, at the edge of the Mediterranean region, and the desert, which is split actually into two subdivisions. One is the semi-desert, and the other extreme desert. In the extreme desert, there is a rainfall less than 70 millimeters, average rainfall per year, which is very, very little. It is like 2 to 3 inches, 70 millimeters. And if you go down to Aqaba and Eilat here on the coast of the Dead Sea, you'll reach an average of less than an inch of rain, a single inch of rain per year, which means that in most years there is nothing, there is no rain whatsoever. And then every 5 years, every 7 years, there will be a very rainy year, and then plants have to adapt to this situation. In the most extreme situations, we have what we call an extreme desert, a sterile desert, which is a desert where there is no plants whatsoever. In some areas, they didn't get rain for 20, 30 years, everything died, the seeds that were in the ground lost their viability, and it's sterile. We have some corners at the south part of the country like that, and it's very famous from the Sahara, from Egypt, and from the Arabian Peninsula, the sterile desert. But in our region, we have extreme desert, and we have in these areas what we call wadi vegetations, which is the slopes are sterile, but the vegetation is confined to the wadis or to the washes where the water comes. And over there we can see some plants. But these plants in the extreme desert have to adapt to this very unpredictable situation. So the next rain might come next week or might come in 5 years. So it's really impossible to know what to do. If you compare this to the Mediterranean region, above 400 millimeters of rain, the plants, even in dry years, will get quite a good amount of rain. So they know, so to say, in their genes that the rain will come, so they are in less unpredictable situation. And this is probably what is so exciting. In general, if you look at the right map, you can see the Sahara-Arabian region with the plants that come from Sahara and Arabia, obviously, in the extreme desert. And then you have the Irano-Turanian region, which is the cold deserts of Central Asia, Southwest Asia, Anatolia, Iran, that area, Iraq, part of Jordan, and in Israel, it really dwindles. So we have in our small country or small corner of the world, a combination of plants that come from, all sorts of regions, which makes it also exciting. So the desert might look very desolate and miserable, but I find also beauty in such landscapes that are really, really dry for many, many years. This is in the Arava Valley on the border of Jordan and Israel. So you can see some acacia trees and some, cracking soil, this very saline soil. It's very tough to live in this situation. And these are plants that are waiting for these 5 to 7 years, sometimes 10 years for the next year, for the next rain that might come. And obviously not many plants are adapted to survive in this environment. And if you compare the Mediterranean flora of our region, so you have about 2,300 native species, the desert have about only 600 native species, and each one of them is a wonder. So if I have to choose a single plant that portrays the wonders of the extreme desert, I would choose this guy, this flower that is called Rose of Jericho. And the Rose of Jericho is a small, really inconspicuous annual with tiny yellow, white flowers. It will germinate if there is rain, and then will bloom, and rapidly it will produce fruit. The flowers, most of them will not wait for insects that might come or might not come. So most of the flowers, if they are not pollinated by insects, they will be pollinated by themselves, self-pollinated. And then very quickly everything finishes. And when everything finishes, it dries, it's an annual plant, and it will close like a fist and remain on the ground. And again, this thing will wait for next week or for 5 or 7 years or even 10 years till the next rain. So you have a dead annual plant that is closing on its dry fruits full of living seeds. So it's a treasure that is kept in this feast. And believe me, it's very difficult to open this feast. You really need a plier or something metal to open it. So birds or insects or rodents are not able to open these things. The other option is to disperse your seeds on the ground. And if you disperse your seeds on the ground, then animals will eat your seeds. Again, birds, insects, rodents, and other animals will eat your seeds. So this plant is really keeping its treasure, and annual plants do not have other options to reproduce. What they did in their living season is what they did, and then they are just waiting for the next rain. If the next rain will come and there will be 2 or 3 millimeters of rain, nothing will happen. If there will be a stronger rain with 5 or 6 millimeter rain, again, nothing will happen, which is magic. Only above 10 millimeters of rain will cause the opening of this structure. And what is happening, if you look at my fingers, is that the inner cells of the stems is filled with more water than the outer part of the stem, which causes the stems, the dead stems, to open physically and expose the seeds to the rain. So the dead mother plant is a water clock that can measure the rain and open and disperse the seeds only when there is enough water for the seeds to bloom and to fruit, to grow, to bloom, and to fruit, which is 10 millimeters. So this is really a wonder. These plants are, you can see here again, the plants from previous years scattered, and then the young ones that were dispersed from them, germinating in a rainy season a couple of years ago in the Negev desert. So the Rose of Jericho is an ancient desert element with no other relatives in its family, which is the mustard plant family, and it's really interesting. A lot of plants in the desert belong to the beet plant family. One of them is Anabasis, and they also bloom very shyly. So you might think these are flowers, but these are not flowers. These are winged fruits that are dispersed by the wind. But on the left here, you can see the flowers, and you can see the anthers popping out of the stems. These are corolla-less flowers. So there is no investment in the corolla because the insects might not come. There are very few insects in the desert. So these plants are wind pollinated. So they produce a lot of pollen. The pollen is dispersed by wind. Most of the pollen get lost. some of the pollen will be captured in neighboring plants, and then pollination and fertilization will take place. And what is nice is that in the fruiting stage, the plant becomes very ornamental. Sometimes it's whitish, sometimes it's pinkish. So this is really a beautiful desert shrub. The other thing you can see is that the stem is really jointed. There are no leaves. The leaves are really gone. So leaves are organs where the plants lose a lot of water from. And the stems are really articulated, jointed, and the photosynthesis takes place on the stems. And the fact that this is a jointed, these are jointed stems means that the plant can shed part of its body gradually as it gets dry during the year. So in dry years, it will be really restricted to a woody base. And in good years, rainy years, it will grow. And it's really modular. It can really adapt its size. Compare it to, I don't know, a plant you have at home, a begonia that you have in a pot at home, that you forgot to water, you went abroad and you come back after 10 days or 2 weeks, and the whole plant collapsed. This doesn't happen with any basis. It can drop part of it and remain intact and remain really alive, even if there is no water. And many other plants are doing similar things. The other one is Zygophyllum. As you can see here, it has 2 leaflets, and they are fleshy leaflets, and they can be dropped off if it's getting dry. And the whole shrub can really decrease in size and increase in size according to water availability. Look at the picture here behind the shrub. You can see that only the wash is full of plants, and between the washes on the slopes, it's really sterile. So this is the situation in an extreme desert where the vegetation is really restricted. Other plants have a bit different adaptations to the extreme desert. So Blepharis is really, really prickly, spiny, unpleasant plant. So if you're a camel or a goat, I think you would think twice before you bite this plant. And the thing is that this plant is a perennial, so it really dries with a lot of seeds inside, and it keeps the seed under this spiny structure. And then when the rain comes, it really shoots the seeds away from the mother plant. Sometimes it comes with beautiful blue flowers. So it shoots the seeds, and the seeds are really sticky. And the reason why the seeds are sticky is for them to stick on the ground or stick on the next rock and not get flooded by the flood after the rain. Because in the desert, there's very little vegetation to slow down the water flow. So the slightest rain causes these floods. And if I'm the mother plant, I live here, probably it's good enough for my children. So that's why it's good that I dispersed my seeds around me and not really far from me. This is on contrary to more wet situation where there is a lot of competition between the plants in the Mediterranean or in Europe. It's a much more competitive ecological habitat. In the desert, there is not so much competition because there is very little water, so there are not so many plants. Some of the annuals are doing the same. So Trigonella is doing the same. You can see here this tiny, very cute plant blooming. It is again self-pollinating, and as it finishes, it is fruiting. It's getting woody, kind of woody, and just stays on spot. Look at the right picture, and all the seeds are kept over here. It's very hard to crack these small pods and get the seeds out of them. This is called basicarpy. And again, what it means, if it goes good for me, it will be good for my offspring. I will keep my offspring next to me. And when the rain comes, I do not germinate all my offspring. I will not put all my eggs in one basket. I will gradually, along the years, make them germinate and then make the best out, increase their chances of survival. Trigonella stellata. Sometimes we are lucky to have a miracle of the blooming desert. And in 1991, which is now 30 years ago, I was lucky to be around the Dead Sea. At that year, I think the Dead Sea got around 300 millimeters of rain, which is about 3 times more than the average of the rainfall in the North, in the North Dead Sea area. And the whole desert was blooming, full of poppies and stalks and linarias, and full of flowers and places we couldn't even imagine that will bloom. We thought they were so salty. The salt probably was washed, the seeds germinated, and then the whole desert was blooming. So I'm now 56. It happened once in my life, and I hope it will happen again sometime. But this is a very rare occasion where the desert blooms like that. It's very patchy. It could be very patchy. So we are lucky from year to year to find patches of really strong blooming somewhere in the desert. But the whole desert blooming, that happened in 1991, as you can see in this old slide that I scanned quite recently. A lot of things are growing in these kind of years. For example, here you can see false chamomile, but if you look at the Latin name of this plant, it says Anthemis maris mortui, and maris mortui, obviously in Latin, is the Dead Sea. So this false chamomile was named after the Dead Sea because it is endemic to the Dead Sea area. And I love these kind of names because they really tells us a bit more about the location of the plant. You can see some rumex next to it with the red flowers, and then with triangular or heart-shaped leaves. And if you chew these leaves, they are really lemony. So if you're in the desert and you have your water, but you need something refreshing, you might want to chew one of these leaves. You don't have to swallow the leaf. You can spit it just for the flavor. You'll enjoy these kind of lemony taste, flavor. Some of the plants are really restricted, like this Anthemis maris mortui. Some of the plants in the desert are really widespread. So Senecio glaucus is widespread throughout the Sahara Arabia and also in our region. And you can see in a good year in the small depression in the sand or in some place, you have loads of them blooming, which is obviously a joy. Another widespread species is Linaria helava, which comes in all kinds of colors. So I'm showing you here only the violet and yellow forms or varieties, but there is also a white variety as well. This might be very interesting because along the Dead Sea and the Arava Valley, you find only the violet ones. And as you go out of these regions, you find the paler ones. And it might be interesting one year to do some research on these linarias. Here is again the rumex with the lemony leaves. Now, the size of the plant here is about 60, 70 centimeters tall, which is very huge. Usually it's a very small plant. So annual plants are very flexible. If there is a good year with strong rains that come one after the other, then the plant can be really, really big. If there is very little rain, the plant might be only very small, produce a few seeds, and that's what it does. So actually we might think maybe the population is grown only in very rare occasions, in very good years that happen every 10 or 20 years. And then there is a bigger seed dispersing, and then a bigger seed bank in the soil. And normal years where there are just little rain might not affect the size of populations. So the ecology of the whole ecosystem, the desert ecosystem, is also exciting. That's the stalk, Matiola, which scents very nicely like the cultivated stalks you might know from the gardens. But it's very nice to see these carpets of flowers that will hang on for a couple of weeks, and then if there is no rain, everything will dry very, very quickly. So the desert plants know to germinate quickly, to bloom quickly, and to fruit quickly, disperse the seeds, and finish everything quickly. So if there is only one rain, the whole thing will be gone after 2 or 3 months. The whole cycle of these annual plants will be finished. And a lot of plants that do that comes from the cabbage plant family, like the stalk and like this Diplotaxis. They all have these mustard chemicals in their leaves, which means that less insects eat them. So when they are green, at least they are not being grazed by insects. The larger animals will eat them. Sometimes when you look into details, you see very fine details. For example, the young flower here is yellow and the older flower is still on, but it's much paler. So the plant really directs the insects to the young flowers where there is more pollen and nectar to eat. The older flowers are still part of the advertisement of the whole inflorescence, but they are empty and they are marked. And especially the bees that are intelligent pollinators know very quickly where to go, and they only go to the top flowers. Diplotaxis is with all its species is very common in the desert. In good years, you really see carpets of flowers, but again, this happens only once every 10 or 20 years. Usually you don't see this kind of landscape. So when the desert is blooming, we really advertise it and we really call the people to come and see the blooming desert, or come to see this corner because there was a thunderstorm over here and it's blooming over here, and it's really beautiful. You can see from the same family all kind of species that look a bit different. Here you can see that the fruit is ended by a big style at the top, which is very different from other members of its family. But not only mustards are growing in the desert. You can see here Volutaria with its two species. One is more blue, the other one is more pink. They are really, really beautiful flowers. But you know, the left picture is misleading because it's really a very good close-up. The right picture shows the plants as they are. So they're really kind of weeds, I would say. But I find the great joy to zoom into the flowers and through photography enjoy their beauty. So you might want to get closer to the flowers if you want to really enjoy them. Some of them are really, really nice. So if you're not really spiny, maybe have a few spines next to the blooming head, because the blooming head will be later a fruiting head and will be full of fruit, of seed. And the seeds are your future. So if you want to be spiny, at least be a little bit spiny around your kids and protect them. So these are the magic of plants in the desert. A lot of plants in the desert are succulent or subsucculent. Here you can see Lonea, which comes for a very short period, and it knows if there is a flood to capture the water in its foliage, in its stems, succulent stems, and then hang this water, do whatever you can do with this water, which is blooming, photosynthesizing, blooming, fruiting, seeding, and then finish the whole thing. In 2014, I was lucky enough to cross the border and hike in South Jordan. And when you cross to Aqaba, you have to take perhaps only a 40 minutes drive to reach Wadi Rum, which is really one of the most beautiful areas in the world. It's just imagine a chunk of hundreds of sandstone reddish mountains eroded into big endless sand dunes. It's really amazing place. And in 2014, it was a very rainy year, and the whole plains were covered by this Silene villosa, which is not blooming in the daytime. You can see the flowers kind of closed, but the flowers are open only in the nighttime. So when we went out of the camps in the nighttime, you could see the whole sand dune glowing in white with these flowers that are waiting for winter insects to pollinate them. It's very famous with the genus Silene. You can see also here is Silene viviani, which is a very shy, inconspicuous flower, really, really small. But I've never seen it blooming. Only a couple of years ago, I stayed in the desert, and in the evening, I saw that the flowers are really opening to be pollinated by night moths or other nocturnal insects. And in the early morning, I still managed to see the flower open, and look how magical this flower is. It's really amazing. And as the sun comes up, the petals are really curled inwards, and the whole flower closes. So this flower will live only for a few hours in the night, and that's what it does. Silene. Poppies are also common in the desert, and you can see that there is a division between two big, I would say, adaptations to the desert. The one is the plants that avoid the drought seasons. These are usually the annuals that are really surviving the dry season in seed form. And the other ones are the trees and shrubs that are really, they know how to decrease and to have small leaves, and they are really dealing with the dry season. We saw the poppies here. Here is the horned poppy. The sticks that protrude from the plants, these are the pods full of seeds. These pods are the character of horned poppies compared with true poppies. These are really beautiful flowers, perennial ones. We grow them also in the garden, and you can see that they range in their color from side to side. So it's really something that we should cultivate. Zila spinosa belongs to the cabbage family, but unlike most other cabbage family plants, it is perennial, it is spiny. You can see the spines here. And in a good year, you can see it gets full of flowers. And this plant will not live for long. It will live for 2 or 3 years. Now, the guy that you see here is named Dudi Rivner. He is from Kibbutz Elot, next to the city of Elat and the city of Aqaba, and he really knows every rock in the extreme desert. And he made some really interesting findings in the desert. I will show you a bit later their findings. But not all the plants in the desert are really small. There are some bigger plants like this apple of Sodom with its starry blue waxy flowers, and then big fruits that you want to bite, but you shouldn't bite because they are really poisonous and they are really hollow. So when you open the fruit, it's just empty, full of tufted seeds that are dispersed by seeds. This is a very poisonous plant like oleander. It also belongs to the oleander plant family, but we think this is a great plant for gardens and roadsides in the desert. So we really think that we should adopt more plants from the desert into our garden, which is tough because desert plants do not germinate well, do not grow well sometimes, and if you irrigate them regularly, they might not look so good as they look in nature. Another magnificent tree of the desert is moringa, which is very famous in Africa and India because it's very useful. But in our region, we have moringa peregrina, which is a leafless tree. So there are no leaves on this tree. You can see the big pod. And what is interesting that in springtime, it produces these large white pinkish flowers that are scented in the nighttime. So it's a beautiful tree. It's easy to grow, but it is not reliable. So you wouldn't want to sit under a big tree like that. You don't want to climb on a tree like that because it's fragile. So you might want to prune it properly in a garden. So you can grow it in a garden, but you want to treat it well in order to keep safe. Here you can see the Dead Sea and Judean desert, and you can see after a good rain, some plants are germinating. And what caught my eye is this plant here, which is kind of silvery. And when I approached it closely, I found the most amazing flower of the desert. This is Trichodesma boissieri, named after the Swiss botanist Boissier, Edmond Boissier. It's one of the only light blue flowers I know from our region. There are no flowers in this color in our region. So for us, this is magic. You can see that after blooming, the fruit is very interesting. So the calyx open like a big purplish star, and then you can see 4 plates or cup-like mericarps, which are the seeds. So the whole plant is really interesting. We started growing this plant in our desert conservatory in the Jerusalem Botanical Garden. And then from a plant that will wait for the rain and then will bloom for a couple of weeks, we got a plant that blooms almost all year in our tropical house in Jerusalem and produce a lot of seeds. So we decided to disperse the seeds, and we are selling these seeds in small packages, part of a big project of wildflowers, which we call Bring Back Nature to Your Garden. So that's a big project in our garden. We are more successful with Mediterranean plants, but we are all the time trying to do that with desert plants, which again is more tricky. Surprisingly, we don't have really succulents, native succulents in our region. So we are not like in the Americans where you have all these cacti. In Israel, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, there are very few real succulents, and they belong to the genus Caralluma and its relatives. This is Caralluma sinaica. You can see the flowers if you make a good close-up. They are really beautiful, but look at the plant. What is more interesting is the whole plant, which is kind of silvery with a lot of fingers. You can see my shoe here just to give you a scale. This is one of the biggest plants. So this plant is very fragile, and it breaks easily. But what is nice is that a finger like that can roll with the flat and root in a different location. So this is vegetative reproduction, which is on top of the sexual reproduction taking place in the fruit and the seed. Caralluma sinaica, which is a rare plant of the region. There are some sages in the desert, surprisingly. One of them, this is the one I really like, Salvia desertii, which in good year will become a small cloud of small, tiny violet flowers. And this happens really once in a 10 year, not more than that. And when it happens, we feel privileged to see that. Cousins of the sages are origanums, and I was lucky enough to be a student of the late Professor Avinoam Danin, who described 3 of those 4 species in the region. 2 of them are Jordanians, or Origanum jordanicum, with tiny flowers, or Origanum petreum near Petra in that area with yellowish flowers, and Origanum ramonense in Israel in the Ramon area, and Origanum dai in lower altitude. But these kind of plants, each one evolved or speciated in the top of a mountain or top of a mountain ridge. So the mountain ridges in the desert are kind of islands genetically isolated from the next populations by lowlands. So in each mountain ridge, a different origanum evolved. We are growing some of these plants in the garden. I thought this would be water-wise and we need to irrigate them. They grow in nature in rock crevices, but under cultivation, they need non-stop irrigation. You forget to irrigate them 1 week in summer, they will collapse. So that was a surprise. And they are all herbs, important herbs for the Bedouins. So they are very interesting. Capers are exciting. This is Caparis cartilaginea, which grows in the really extreme desert. You can see it here. It's evergreen. Even if there was no rain for 10 years, it will remain green. That's why I think these flowers should be included in desert gardening. And already we know how to germinate it. We produce seedlings. We are distributing seedlings in desert villages. This is happening also by some other organizations and gardens. I hope this will be the ground cover of desert garden, for example. In summertime, it will produce a lot of flowers and a lot of fruit. You see, the flowers are beautiful, the fruit are beautiful, and this will linger on till November, even December. So June 5 years ago, I was staying in Mitzpe Ramon in the Negev Highlands, and I've decided to look for capers. So I went down to the Ramon crater and found the Caparis ramonensis, and not far from it, the Egyptian caper over there. Then I went down to the South Negev. I found Caparis decidua, the leafless caper, and then I found cartilaginea, which is these flowers. So in one day, I was lucky enough to see 4 different of capers, which is the edge, let's say, of this family, which is mostly tropical. And so I felt very privileged to see 4 capers in one day. The relative of capers is merua, which is like a caper, but it doesn't have any petals. This is really endangered in the Dead Sea, both in the Jordanian side, Palestinian-Israeli side, really, really endangered species we're trying to grow. Very few desert plant became part of the cut flower industry. So here you can see erva, which is a perennial of the extreme desert, and it's really easy to grow it and produce this nice bouquet. And these are sold in Israel, but also exported to the Dutch flower industry. Some of them are really not tested. So Limbarda, which grows in saline springs in the desert, should be cultivated again and tested in gardens. So we have already germinated the plant, and we are going to distribute it in desert gardens for people to try it as an ornament, because we think this plant might be really successful and bloom for a long period. By the way, it blooms in autumn, which is a good season, because in autumn we have very little flowers. With other desert flowers, we have very bad experience. So look at this lotus with red flowers, producing these red carpets. We never managed to get such a blooming under cultivation. In under cultivation, it has one stem here, one stem there, one flower here, one flower there. It's really not impressive, the Lotus lanuginosus. You see there is a lot of diversity in the desert. Astragalus is one of the great genes. By the way, it's the largest plant genus in the world. So Astragalus cahyricus is a huge plant, perennial, with beautiful flowers. The calyx are inflating into balloons, beautiful balloons after that, and we really want to cultivate it. So you see, there are a lot of things we enjoy in nature, but we didn't have time or energy or the resource to cultivate them. You see the astragalus, each one is very beautiful. It's very easy to say, this is great, I want this in my garden. It's very difficult to mimic such a beautiful appearance in your garden. So it's a challenge, and it's worth the trouble, I think, to try and cultivate it. In some cases, you are failing, like the red lotus, and in some other cases, you are succeeding. And that's another astragalus. Some of them are really beautiful. This is Astragalus sparsus, extremely rare in our region. In Israel, it is threatened by the growing city of Eilat that grows on its habitat. So this is really at the outskirts of Eilat. In a good year, this carpet is one plant that was maybe 3 or 4 meters across. Really big plant that is really creeping and producing a lot of blooming. And we managed to germinate it and grow it also in our desert conservatory in Jerusalem. So it proved to behave, so to say. I would like also to make a few words about desert grasses, perennial grasses. Some of them, like the canthus, are really beautiful. Some of them are really aggressive and invasive in your garden, like this orientalis. Some of them behave like this divisus. But I think we should incorporate more of these beautiful grasses, perennial grasses in the gardens, and really know to choose the right species. We are already growing a few more of these perennial grasses, and I love these grasses. I love this appearance in a rock garden or even in a Mediterranean garden. They might look very, very nice and very different from other plants you might want to grow in your gardens. Some of our desert plants are progenitors of plants that we eat. So Cartamus persicus was cultivated into Cartamus, I forgot the name now, the one you make color from, tinctorius. And this is, the seeds of these plants are used to make oil. So safflower oil, and also as a cultivar, as an ornamental plant. So this is the real thing that grows in the desert. And when we are talking about agriculture crops, it's very important as a botanical garden, obviously, but in general, to keep the relatives of these plants alive and to keep these genetic populations, because in these populations you might find a lot of other adaptations and you might want to use them in new varieties of a crop. Going back to poisonous plants, here you see Gomphocarpus with very unique flowers and unique fruit. And this plant is very common, for example, in the ancient city of Petra in Jordan, especially in overgrazed areas, because it's so poisonous, no goat will bite from it, or maybe a young goat will bite for it, and it will be so bitter it will spit it, and then it won't do it again. And in overgrazed area, this plant becomes very common. In Israel, it's not so common. Look at the Arabian stock and look at this perennial plant. So these are the remains of the plant from last year, and here it is the new sprouting from the same plant this year. So you can see really that the plant can survive the summer or the summers that are dry. Some of the plant have small shy flowers, and then suddenly in fruit, they become really beautiful. So Paracarium rugulosum is one of these desert perennials. This year, the first time we cracked, and Omri, who is an intern from the British Friends of the Jerusalem Botanical Garden, really find out the way how to germinate this plant, because last year it was unsuccessful. So he knows now the exactly concentration of gibberellic acid, what to do exactly to make this plant germinate. You can see that each one of these flowers, if you sit next to it and look at it, it's really a wonder. You can see these veins, beautiful veins in this legume, and then beautiful fruits that are spiny, by the way, protecting the seeds from being eaten. It's really magic, and you can see that the whole plant is hairy. So this hairiness decreases water loss from the plant. It also paints the plant in a paler color, which means that some of the sun radiation is reflected back, and then the plant is not heated that much. If it doesn't heat that much, it doesn't lose so much water. Last year, I was lucky enough to see for the first time the fruit of Ephedra ciliata, which is a leafless shrub of the extreme desert. And these are not really fruits botanically. These are cones, like pines have cones. Ephedra has cones as well. And these are fleshy cones that are attracting birds. So the birds will eat the cones and then disperse the black seeds, which you can see here as well. So that for me was revelations to see this wonderful fruit. We document all these findings and pictures in our website, which is called Flora of Israel. So if you Google Flora of Israel website, you will find it. I was thinking whether I should include this picture in my talk or not, but I couldn't resist. This is really the tiniest flower, and it's perennial. It's called Zetzinia. It belongs to the Zygophalaceae family. And for botanists, this is, of course, something very, very special. But if I show this to my wife, she will burst into laughter. She said, it's a weed. Why are you wasting your time on these tiny, tiny greenish flowers? But I think it's magic. And you can see it's growing next to the granite grains next to Elat, and it will bloom maybe once in every 5 or 8 years. And when it does, it fruits rapidly. This is already the fruit, and disperse its seeds. So these are the wonders of the extreme desert. Dudi Rivner, the guy you saw before in one of the slides, found a couple of years ago this plant for the first time along Wadi Faran that comes from Sinai to Israel. So we know this plant from Sinai, and probably with the big floods, it comes again and again to Israel and trying to establish it within proper Israel. Now the question, if we're talking about plant conservation, is whether it is sustained, self-sustained population, or this is every time he tries to establish, but it doesn't succeed. So time will tell. I was proud enough to identify this plant because I knew it from Sinai, Brochia cinerea, which is a tiny annual. But if not only all the plants that Dudi Rivner found were small, miserable annuals, this is the Tephrosia nubica, and look, you can see how beautiful the flowers are. And this is a small shrub, and this plant used to grow in one place in the city of Elat. We used to pilgrim to this place, to this plot, and to see this plant in its only site in Israel, and then they built there. So it was gone 1 year, and that's it. And we already wrote in our red data book, oh, this is extinct, until Dudi Rivner found it in another site, to our joy. He also found Cliome chrysantha, a Sinai plant in Israel, and he also found after 24 dry years, Cometes germinated and bloomed south of the city of Eilat, near the border to Egypt, Sinai. So the seeds waited for 24 years at that site. We know there was not a single drop of rain for 24 years. So you can see the smile of Mimi, one of our greatest botanists, so happy to find this plant. And there is only one orchid in the desert which grows in the springs of the desert. I don't have much time left, but I want to, with the rest of the time, to talk about the bulbs and to talk about the Negev highlands, the Negev desert highlands. So in the Negev desert highlands and the vicinities, we have fantastic irises. You can see iris atorfusca in the northern Negev, in Bedouin land, where you have these fallow fields or barley fields managed by the Bedouins, but this is traditional agriculture. In traditional agriculture, you can still have a lot of wildflowers, including irises. So we are happy to keep to have these. And in the higher Negev highlands, you might find Tulipa biflora, which grows also in Jordan, or Tulipa cistola, which is a bit different from the Iranian cistola. That's why the question mark. One year I was hiking in the Negev highlands and I found this kind of plant dispersing its seeds, and I didn't have a clue on the identity of the plant. And it took me a really long time to realize that these dispersing seeds belong to this beautiful Iris regis usea, another plant that grows in southern Jordan and in the Negev highlands in Israel. So in rainy years, in January, February, you might be lucky enough to see this flower. Or Ixiolirion, which is another fantastic, this plant is Irano-Turanian, coming from Central Asia, but again, common in South Jordan, common in Israel, in the highlands, with these magnificent pink flowers. Not everything is easy. Sometimes we have problems. So we have a small project with Chris Thorogood from the Oxford Botanical Garden, and we are trying to realize what's going on with Cistantia, which are parasitic plants. So Tubulosa is the yellow one. Violacea is the violet one. But what is this? This is something in between. And then Dar Ben-Natan, who is a great young botanist, found this guy with hairy bracts, and we identify this guy as Cisante fisa, which was not known from our region at all. So we are doing some research on desert plants. And we are doing some research also on plants we want to cultivate. Globularia arabica, we realized that under cultivation in Jerusalem, Mediterranean Jerusalem, it blooms for 2 or 3 months non-stop, and it's water-saving plant. You don't have to irrigate it that much. So we have a lot of work to include new plants. And here you can see the relic narcissus in the desert. They are blooming just now, starting to bloom in the northern Negev, near Dimona and Yerucham, the cities in the Negev. And you can see in the cracks, suddenly Mediterranean plants that are really relict from colder, wetter times. They remained in these rock tracks. And to see such a Mediterranean plant in the middle of the desert is a real joy. And if you would smell them, you realize that this is the true thing. It's not like the smell you have from cultivated daffodils, which is very strong. This is really delicate, beautiful, beautiful scent. As you go up into the Negev highlands, you might be lucky to have a snowy day or a couple of days. That happened in 2015, February, and then I could see the irises and the leontis and all the plants coming out of the snow. It was a magic Friday, which finished very, very quickly because a strong rain fell on the snow and everything melted after a few hours. If you're talking about the desert highlands, I must talk about Rheum palestinium, the desert rhubarb, that produced 2 big leaves that are really the antithesis of the desert. 2 big leaves that have kind of topography. They are collecting all the water into the base of the plant. And the 2 big leaves might bloom and then they fruit really beautifully. It looks like a lot of earrings are hanging on this peculiar plant. And a lot of small plants. I don't want to say so many words about each plant, but you can really enjoy the intricate structures around the inflorescence of Zagea, which is extremely least known species, or the peculiar flowers of Polygala, or the really camouflage flowers of one of the wild desert garlic over here. Or come in autumn when it's all very, very dry. But if you look really carefully, you will find the autumn crocus, the Colchicum tunicatum, and you will find a lot of the beet plant family species fruiting in these winged fruits, and you might find crocus in the Negev highlands. And if you are really lucky, you find Pancratium sickenbergeri carpeting the sands in the desert. This is happening in Israel, but also happening in Wadi Ram in South Jordan in the sandy desert. So as you can see, the desert is full of surprises. Some of them are really tiny. This is the tiniest flower, but as you go close to it, you realize the beauty of these flowers. And there are also animals in the desert. So these are the Asian wild ass that was re-released in the Negev, and they are now quite common, or the ibex, the Nubian ibex that are so common in our desert highlands today. And we are proud to have saved them from extinction. So you don't have to come in springtime. If you come in summertime, I'll find for you a plant that is blooming. For example, this mullein, Rubascum sinaicum, that will bloom in the middle of the summer. So each season you might find something. So I hope I kept you all awake and showed you a little bit of the desert bloom. And I would like to thank you very much for your time. And there are maybe a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. You can write them on the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ori. That was fantastic, of course. And I was pleased that you did actually mention dianthus. I was waiting. I'm sorry there was no violas in there, but I just had a thought while you were talking and saying how difficult it was to cultivate a lot of these in gardens. I know the Botanic Garden has a fantastic collection of pots. Do you find that growing some of these species in pots, they do better than the open ground? We
Definitely.
really control what they're growing in and how much water and how it doesn't sit, it just goes straight through the pot. Can you tell us quickly a bit about growing them in pots, if possible?
Definitely, and they don't have to deal with Mediterranean competition with other weeds in the garden. And if they are in a pot, they are next to your nursery and you see them quite often. So it's from all perspective, it's easier to grow them in pots, obviously.
So that would be one way to get them going, is through pots and then disperse them in the gardens.
That's one thing. The other thing is try to convince the desert villagers to grow them in their garden outdoor, because in the desert it's easy. I didn't mention there is a small botanical garden in Kibbutz Samar in the Arava Valley that is doing that very, very well. It's called the Desert Samar Garden, and I really recommend if you're in the region to visit this garden. And of course the Engedi Botanic Garden, which is very famous desert garden.
So, Ori, there's a question from Hannah Gardner, who you know very well. Can you see it, or shall I read it to you?
No, I can see it. Do you have any predictions, or have you noticed any pattern in climate change in relation to desert flora? I must say that I didn't see any changes at the moment. And there is a big research taking place, managed by Marcelo Sternberg from the Tel Aviv University, and he has this long-term monitoring areas in the desert and the Mediterranean. He's doing his research now for 20 years, and he didn't find yet any difference in the vegetation in either of these stations. So probably there are changes, but it takes time to see them. And it is longer process.
And also, I just want what I found interesting was the night-scented plants. I'm not a great person to sleep in a tent, but you did slightly inspire me to stay out in the desert one night and smell the night-scented. I mean, is it worth sleeping in a tent for these things, or are they
It really depends. I find it magic to live in a tent, to stay in a tent in the desert. My wife finds it horrifying.
I'm with her.
But there are all kinds of options. There are villages, there are hotels today, there are small places. So it's really up to you. It's no problem. I see Jim wrote something. Are the other species which should be commercialized, or doesn't Simnitas offer any competitive advantage? Definitely. I think, Jim, I don't know if you've missed my capers, but the capers are really interesting, especially the desert capers are, I think, potentially interesting for gardening. We have to avoid, plants that might become invasive, but definitely there are several things that we might want to commercialize.
Well, it's interesting, Ori, because, one of our tenants is Doom and Orange, which is the largest floriculture operation on the planet right now. And we have 300,000 feet of greenhouse space that's opening up in June of next year. And we're talking with them about expansion. They're using 80% of the site now, which is, they're in 400,000 feet. They're using 80% of that production for commercial retail product grown on the site. And so it has some real interesting potential from both perspectives in terms of being able to grow well and really be an interesting introduction to the North American market that could be a very compelling idea.
And while you are saying that, I'm thinking about Za'atar, for example, Za'atar spice, which grows also in the desert, and some other herbs that might be cultivated as really unique, desert Holy Land products.
And would you or the garden be advantaged by that kind of a relationship at all? Do you see, other than imparting this incredible knowledge and interesting opportunity, I mean, if you organize this kind of a presentation around those species and could sort of say to the plant scientists on this side in an hour, these are the species you guys ought to be continuing, and you could, in some form or fashion, facilitate that in some way that would benefit the garden, I'd be highly motivated to sort of make that kind of thing happen.
Thank you very much. It sounds really interesting. Definitely, yes.
And I think consultancy for the garden is a very useful tool for generating money. Ori is one of the experts on the subject, and I think, it's only a plane ride away, and he can do a huge amount.
Yeah, I think there's one more question from Spencer. He asked two things, but I think one question is still outstanding.
Can you read it? I cannot see it.
The Botanic Garden, Ori answered that by text.
Oh, okay. So there are three main botanical gardens in the desert in Israel. One is in Eilat, which is more ornamental kind of place. The other one is devoted to the native flora in Kibbutz Samar, which is in the southern Arva Valley. And the other famous one is in Kibbutz En Gedi on the Dead Sea coast. And I must admit that this is one of the most beautiful botanical gardens in the world, because it's really, with the views to the Dead Sea, it's really, you cannot compete with that.
It's an extraordinary place, and you can sleep in a very, very comfortable bed. The rooms are extraordinarily good.
Yeah. Are there garden designers in Israel who are well known for their desert gardens for private? And not so much. I would say there are a lot of garden designers and landscapers that are working a lot in the Mediterranean area and not so much in the desert. I'm sure some of them can produce fantastic works also in the desert, but I cannot think of a particular one that did most of his work in the desert.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all. I think the questions have come to an end. I want to say thank you to everyone who came on tonight. And of course, Ori, you are truly extraordinary. You're an inspiration to listen to. You're humorous, and just such a joy to be spending Sunday evening with you. And please thank your wife. She's very kind, giving you up for an hour. But it really does mean a lot to us as the British Friends of the Botanic Garden to have you as our guest speaker so often. You really are a sensation, and thank you very much. And thank you, Barbara, for doing all the behind work. You do so much and put up with so much. So thank you, Barbara, as well. And good night.
Thank you very much.